live stream version of STRP Scenario number 6, the end of the world as we know it. To tell you a little bit what tonight is about, STRP Scenario is an ongoing series of public talks that focuses on the ethics of technology and the impact it has on individuals and society. This scenario of tonight is part of the STRP Festival in Eindhoven, which has, as you all might know, been cancelled due to the corona pandemic. Very sad, but also very lucky for us that the festival has migrated online tonight. Before we dive into the program of tonight, how are we all doing in these crazy, isolated, and at the same time very connected times? So throw me an emoji in the comments just to get a feeling of how you guys are doing. First off, so before we dive into the program itself, let's hear from the program manager of STRP Scenarios on how STRP takes form online and what we can expect from STRP these following days. Nadine Roestenburg, welcome. I hope you're there.
Hey.
Hey, there you are. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. I'm super excited that we at least do something. And well, I think for everyone in the world, this corona pandemic has a huge impact on all aspects of our lives. And when STRP Festival was being cancelled, that was it made me super sad, obviously, because I mean, we've been working so hard with a great team to make a great program. And so I'm super happy that we at least are able to take part of it online now. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about what this STRP's tiny online festival means, because we believe that now is really the time to talk about the post-Anthropocene. So that's why we want to start the dialogue today online. And hopefully we can continue with live events again in autumn, because we have a great exhibition, and we also have more STRP scenarios planned, as you still can read on our website. So we developed for now a compact online program that consists of tonight's STRP Scenario 6, in which we further explore possible futures in which humans are no longer the dominant species. And we are organizing an intense audio night with music and performances in collaboration with Ja, Nee, Nee, Nee. And that takes place tomorrow evening, so Friday, 3 April from 8 o'clock. And from today on, we will also publish 2 essays every day written by 8 writers and philosophers who will reflect on new scenarios for the post-Anthropocene in relation to our current corona crisis. And later in April, we also have the STRP Book Club that will come together online, obviously, to discuss Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, which is also quite on topic. And we also have an alternative educational program with assignments for pupils and students. So if you're at home, stick at home, or if you're a parent and you think, oh, I can have some, my kids can have something to do, I'll just have a look on our website and you find all information there. And finally, if you would like, you can also sponsor us a little bit by buying these super nice t-shirts. Because yeah, we're all asteroids, and I hope you enjoy today's presentations.
Thanks so much, Nadine, and we might see you later during the Q&A. So thanks for giving us an overview. Bye. So like Nadine said, this evening is about possible futures of the post-Anthropocene, trying to visualize and to imagine what that would be like. The program consists of 4 guest speakers who will each give their perspective on this topic, what it means to be human in relation to non-humans in the broadest sense of the word. They will use their imagination, their visualization, their vulnerability to explore these common connections between humans, objects, living creatures, atoms, molecules, and so on. Exploring this new role of human beings in relation to well, all forms of life, I think is more relevant than ever now because of what is happening in the world due to the corona pandemic. And I am personally very excited to see how tonight's guests make the seemingly impossible imaginable. So let's kick off. Before we do some practical notes, there was going to be a fifth speaker tonight, Pupul Bisht, but she had to cancel because of sickness, so she can't be here. A quick overview of the program. So we're going to start off with our guests, Yolande, Zola, Zoli van der Heide, and Suzanne Dhaliwal. Second is Antoine Bertin, and third is Rocio Berenguer. And every talk will take around approximately 15 minutes. And after the last speaker, so after the fourth speaker, there's a Q&A where all the speakers gather up to answer any questions. And if you have a question during any of these talks, please place them in the comments, either on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching this. And we will get back to your questions in the end. So after Rocio has done her talk, Antoine, Suzanne, Yolande, and me will join. And we will have a discussion, answer your questions, and talk more about their work and perspectives. Great, so let's kick it off. Let me give you a quick introduction of the two first guests. Yolande Zola Zoli van der Heide, as I mentioned, she's the new exhibitions curator at Van Abbe Museum. And together with climate justice, creative and media consultant Suzanne Dhaliwal, they will present their thoughts on what practical measures the art world, artists, art organizations can make to, well, take care of our planetary commons. And they will do that in a dialogue. So let's see if they're here. Welcome, Yolande and Suzanne. Please unmute yourself so we can see you.
Hi.
And hear you. Hey,
hello.
Suzanne. Hey, Yolande. So how are you guys doing today?
We're okay, yeah.
You're okay. So where are you guys at the moment?
I'm in Amsterdam.
Suzanne is in Amsterdam, and Yolande?
Same here in Amsterdam.
Also in Amsterdam. And how is your life now at the moment in these crazy isolated times? Is it much different?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, that leads us quite nicely into our dialogue. Since the pandemic kind of took hold, Yolande and I have been in conversation about how, you know, some things have changed and some things have remained the same, actually. So yeah, Yolande, actually, I want to kick off because this was actually one of my first questions for you. Where are you? What's your working space like? And how is this pandemic affecting your day-to-day life? And are you safe? Are you supported? Are you well stocked? And is your pay secure?
Thank you, Suzanne. It's been really great to converse with you and build this kind of conversation as a way of registering the moment too. So the question of location, as we've been discussing, brings up how a safe domestic space is assumed and asked of us at this time. And it presupposes that one has access to a steady and safe home, whilst we know, from statistics from Wuhan, that the rate of domestic abuse has tripled globally, and women and children who live in domestic violence have no escape from their abusers in quarantine, right? And in Amsterdam, where I'm speaking from, same as you, the municipality is struggling to set up overnight beds in public gyms for the homeless. And as far as I'm aware, this doesn't take account for what people should do over day. The Wereldhuis, which is a community center for undocumented people, had to shut down very recently. And when thinking of this, I was revisiting a passage where Marina Vishmit, the writer, describes the home as the site where politics are born and buried, an expression which conveys the idea that home is a concrete microsite in which everyday matters and the public are embedded. And this redirects our critical gaze to refocus on everyday practices, not as autonomous havens, but as where the system is naturalized. And here I was quoting from two former colleagues who I'd also like to give a shout out to, Michael Tanaka and Bina Choi, from their introduction to the Grand Domestic Revolution Handbook, which was published in 2014 by Casco, my former place of employment, and Valise, the publisher. And I've been revisiting this book as it speaks so concretely to the question of invisibilized reproductive work and how it's tied to the home site, which I think has become evident and palpable ever so much, like from us and those across from us having to negotiate time to do laundry, cook, clean, teach children, care for parents, elders, and so forth. And then to the question, are you safe, supported, well-stocked, and is your pay secure? It's one that's concisely crafted and brought to us by someone we have in common, Suzanne, a speculative writer, curator, and pleasure activist, Amma Josephine Budge, whose writing I'd also like to shout out here, particularly her piece, Watching the Channel, in the magazine, Consented Magazine, which the edition that has to do with the environment, in which she's depicting Black queer life in a kind of post-apocalyptic flooded London, which seems very relevant at this time. In other words, I had to think about types of system changes that are being provoked by these questions, as a lot of us are being seeped deeper into precarity. And to counter this, for example, locally, there's this recent practice that's emerging, I think, of paying cultural workers despite event cancellation in light of COVID-19, which seems rather recognizes freelancers or ZZ payers who depend on income from various gigs and who wouldn't likely be able to make this up, right? And this, of course, I also want to recognize is in stark contrast to myself, as I have a contract and pension for the very first time in my life. But from this, we can deduce, the question may be, what practices can we deduce and keep up once the pandemic passes? And then to this end, initiatives like Platform BK, keeping a keen eye on the government and the government response and organizing accordingly. So after, I'm sure many of you are aware, after taking a survey of how artists and cultural freelancers have been affected by COVID, they are lobbying to ensure that the government considers cultural workers specifically and has a specific package that tends to them next to this TOSA grant that's being given up. So then the question will be, like, how can we continue to support the likes of Platform BK well past the pandemic? And maybe a long-winded response, but to ask it to you, Suzanne, how are you? And if you can describe your working place, where you're speaking from, and how coronavirus has affected your day-to-day, and if you are feeling safe, supported, and well-stocked.
Yeah, thank you for all that insight into how this is impacting cultural workers here. I've actually been working from home since 2009. So it's been strange because actually I've had more company at home. My partner's now working from home. And suddenly there's a culture of care and support and tips and understandings of both the benefits and the harms of working from home in Western privileged situation. So yeah, in no way is my payment secure. I lost months of work, was cancelled, but I was really lucky that there was a network of artists that seemed to kick in around me, the honouring of payments for cancelled fees. So I was able to cover some of those short-term costs, and an old friend even helped me pay rent. But I can't travel back to the UK at the moment, so it's very uncertain how the future of my work, my research, the workshops and the talks that I will give. So now my research has switched to looking at forms of that. I've been really trying to pull on traditional knowledge of food and medicines to feel that my cupboards are safe, support my immunity. And I've been taking a traditional Ayurvedic herb, actually andrographis, which was interestingly used during the SARS outbreak. So I still feel quite scared to go outside. I feel like in some ways the Dutch government and Dutch society isn't necessarily taking this very seriously. I still see a lot of children playing outside. I've also heard, increased racist attacks. So there's a lot of fear around going out, but I'm really trying to meditate and self-soothe. Also, I think because of Brexit, I'm not sure if I qualify for self-employed status. So I think there's many of us who are trying to build sanctuary where we are, but are dealing with increased precariousness as well.
Thank you. I wonder if we should push on to the second question, which speaks to your expertise, actually, which is what is the coronavirus unveiling to us about the urgent need for social and ecological paradigm shift? And how can we ensure that the coronavirus does not increase the normalization of ecofascism and climate activism,
Yeah, I think we've all seen that, this pandemic has really unveiled how little governments are taking heed of scientific knowledge and expertise when it comes to large-scale spending, decision-making, and future-making. We all know that the economic interests of corporations to continue the exploitation of heavy oil, coal, and nuclear energy continues despite the warning of scientific, health, political experts who see how climate change and catastrophe can lead to, the devastation of our civilization. So I think we're seeing that mirrored now. There's this colonization of knowledge and the inability of white supremacy to acknowledge knowledge systems that, may actually be preventing us from taking climate action. And we've seen this play out in real time before our eyes with the Dutch, UK and US government particularly have been stubborn when it comes down to slowing down economic activity to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So I think, the attempt to push herd immunity as a legitimate public health strategy for has been quite shocking when we know that from China, from the expertise that's been coming from scientists and lived experience there, that there could have been different measures taken. And that really mirrors what we see with climate change. Even though Indigenous, Black and POC communities are already living the impacts of climate change and are calling for moratoriums on extractivist projects, see that science and that knowledge just isn't respected. And I think that's something we've been talking about the last few weeks, about how that's been playing out, this attempt to continue business as usual, sacrifice these. So, and also I think, when you mention ecofascism, we've seen fake images of Venice canals with dolphins and people getting excited about the historically low levels of emissions, but any reduction of emissions that comes from the devastation of communities is not a strategy that we can really promote or be part of our future making. So, and we've already seen increased eco-fascist propaganda in the UK. So we really need to be careful about how we celebrate wins for the planet as well. The other thing is we need to be careful that even though we're making short-term wins now, as the economy tries to jumpstart again, there's going to be huge injections of capital in extractivist projects. And this week, Trump actually rolled back the environmental protection measures on the environment. And we also saw the Keystone XL pipeline get huge investment from Alberta. So we have to think about how we're going to keep track of what is actually happening with climate change. And we saw yesterday that the COP26 was actually cancelled and postponed till next year. So how are we going to continue climate justice in the next little while is really important, and why collaborations like the one that we're trying to develop is really important. So I've been wondering what you think is the role of cultural institutions and art in the pandemic, and how this can prepare us to create a cultural landscape that is also going to serve us as we continue into that.
Thanks. Just to underscore, I thought it was really important to be reminded at this moment that ecological change cannot be at the expense of the most vulnerable. And then to your question, as you will know, I was hesitant to take part in the digital version of STRP because, like many of us, it's fair to acknowledge that I was anxious, but I particularly didn't want to fall into this trap of continued or maybe even increased production at this time and place of reflection and organizing. Whilst I'm also acutely aware of the importance of maybe institutional practice at this time, in reflection to of maybe colleagues in the UK who were in limbo for a period because they were to continue as if it was business as usual, right? But which is to say, the discussion has been a way of reflecting, like you also mentioned, and kind of registering where my thought process is thus far, and then also recognizing that it will develop. And I'm particularly grateful to you in the exchange and a lot of the links and resources that we were able to share. And in and amongst them, you shared Irresistible Podcast, the episode entitled Coronavirus, Wisdom from a Social Justice Lens. And through it, it reminded me again of the importance of giving space to and learning from, and I would add with, those who know what they know and know what they need. And otherwise, through the words of the Otlith group who exhibited at Van Abbe Museum last fall, learning from / with those who have lived after an end. And here they're speaking to Black subjectivity in lieu of the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, extractionism from the earth, so thinking about fracking practices and other ecological disasters, which we may understand in terms of an apocalypse, in terms of an end, right? And this is another way of acknowledging those who are living with chronic illness as well, disability, thus an end, but also putting them at the forefront of the wisdom and expertise that come when it comes to dealing with a health crisis in moments like the pandemic that we're facing and experiencing. This is precisely because they've been making do all along. And it's from such communities that we know about how to thrive whilst living at home, how we can better address homelessness, particularly the case of how to deal with self-isolation that's mandated by the state when you don't have a home, what to do when you're feeling lonely in quarantine, and then the more common, how to make homemade sanitizer. And then in terms of the role of cultural institutions, I think they could join in on the insistence of these wisdoms, right? To give space to them in sincere ways and learning from and with. None of this, of course, is new. I mean, there's plenty of practices like decolonial commoning, notions even of degrowth speak to these things to varying degrees. At the same time, I've been thinking about institutional slowdown in order to revisit our mandates and positions when it comes to instituting practices of care, making sure that the institutional front these days largely with the decolonial agenda is matched and backed by its operational end, and then leaning into art practices that speak to this. Policy is particularly interesting to think about here if we consider how quickly a new way life has been learned, right? So the question then is, what is in our archives? What's in our exhibition halls that speaks to this? What measures are our museums, for example, taking to address ecological crisis? And who's around the table when it comes to decision making? And more importantly, who and what is missing, and what steps can we take now to help rectify this?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you make at the end, and that sort of mapping work that needs to happen of the stakeholders and who's involved in our cultural institutions. And I think, now more than ever, we need to continue to unpack the complicity of art institutions in the climate crisis and the social crisis. For instance, funding that's taken from corporations like Shell, who are funding slow industrial genocide and ecocide globally. So I think, continuing to do that work that's been happening with Fossil Free Netherlands. I think also, for me, definitely the role of the art institution has been that there's often a lack of space for questioning and reflecting on social movements. For instance, I know a lot of the work that I've been doing, and some of that with Casco as well, has been trying to find space to look at the forms and the strategies that we use as organizers. For myself, that means questioning the aesthetic of participation and the safety for Black and POC organizers. especially when we look at the fact that we're not going to be able to rely on the old modes of organizing that we had, which involved protests, blockades, mass marches. So I think, as well as mapping the cultural institutions themselves, we're going to need to ensure that queer, Black and POC climate justice organizers, and especially those of us whose work spans between culture production and activism, are cared for at this time, and our voices and our visions are going to be in there. As you know, any attempt to address the climate crisis means that we need to challenge the capitalist, patriarchal, ableist systems that have brought that into place. So I think, just echoing what you're saying there, the need to center those communities who have already been doing work for disability and accessibility justice need to also be at the center of not just being participants, but actually designing what our cultural and climate justice movements are going to look like as well. I was wondering, how do you think that, we can continue to practice solidarity in a time of of social distancing?
So a Culture Action Europe statement that I read recently closes by challenging us from confinement to practice physical distancing and solidarity over the now popular notion of social distancing. So this would require that we take the time to reflect, not as an action of navel gazing, but in order for us to think through system change that addresses social asymmetries, right? And it calls for us to put solidarity above economic gain. And this is important. These are important words to live by, I think, especially at a time where our government, our VVD government, is leading the so-called Frugal Four alongside Germany, Austria, and Finland. And this group are against a common fiscal response, otherwise known as the EU Solidarity Package. And they've been describing solidarity as a moral hazard, and in turn have been rightfully being reminded and corrected that, which is to say that solidarity is not charity. It is the recognition that the struggle of one is the struggle of all. And what's more maybe frightening about this is that their obstruction of this solidarity, this EU solidarity package, hinders the operation of the EU altogether. So in this light, solidarity could maybe be felt in practice through things that, dare I say, we might already know, like learning who your neighbors are. That's both immediate and who are our neighbors at the border, right? Who has access, thinking about migration patterns and how those called, finding out what they need, and if anything, taking action accordingly. And then during our preparations, I asked you, Suzanne, about like grounding techniques against anxiety. And you mentioned that you were returning back to some Sikh prayer practices. And that brought me to think of maybe a more cliche notion of how solidarity can begin from begin from the self in terms of maintaining a healthy body through meditation practices, movement, eating foods that boost the immune system. So recently I learned like elderberry, garlic, echinacea vitamins D, C, and zinc, as well as omega-3 are linked to improving immune function and are good to take whilst you're not sick. And this would be done to ensure that you don't infect others that may be more vulnerable, right? And at the same time, I've been amazed and incredibly overwhelmed by the amount of resources that are coming at us in light of ranging from institutions sharing the archives to, I don't know, weekly Feldenkrais classes that are happening via Zoom by, in my case, taught by artist Yael Davids in lieu of her postponed exhibition, A Daily Practice, that will open after June at Phenomenal Museum, to institutions basically improving the distribution and access practices. And in all of this, there's my mother blasting us with her recipes for boosting one's immune system. So in the spirit and as a way of maybe helping to wrap us up, I thought I would share a recipe by her, which is a simple tea recipe. So you mix fresh turmeric, fresh ginger, fresh lemons, honey, and cinnamon sticks. and you brew that and you drink it, and that helps with your immune system. And then in terms, maybe back to you actually, it would be lovely to hear from you in terms of how you think we can continue to practice solidarity whilst practicing social distancing.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really yummy. I'm going to be making that after this. I think the one thing I've been struck by is how much my work has already involved social distancing. You know, a lot of the organizing that I've been doing has been from the UK and Amsterdam all the way to the Gulf Coast, to Arctic, to the tar sands, to Nigeria. So I think a lot of the strategies that we've been using because of not wanting to fly, of social organizing, are going to continue. So it's just ramped up the number of webinars that I'm on, trying to do actions where we call corporations and bombard them with calls for those who are violating Indigenous rights. So for me, I've been trying to do daily practice with Healing Justice London, who are led by Farzana Khan, and that's been through WhatsApp group, and that's been helping me to ground, to take care of my body, and to be able to continue that climate justice work. So I think that's something as well, is how do we support those who have already been doing this work, to make sure that they continue in it. And as I mentioned, just the news from yesterday that the climate talks have been cancelled really means that finding out who's been doing this work and how that's been happening at a distance, and taking that leadership, like I said, from survivors, myself as a survivor of PTSD from the movement itself, I think how to center that knowledge is going to be really incredible. So I want to thank you again for this conversation and the hours of dialogue that have been happening between it, and I'm going to hand it back over.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Suzanne and Yolande. Just a quick check-in with the audience listening right now. If you have any questions for Yolande and Suzanne, please write them down in the comments so that we can come back to them after the last speaker. So there's Antoine, and then Rocio, and then Suzanne and Yolande will join us again in answering any questions you have. I really enjoyed your perspective, both of your perspectives, and also the practical kind of smaller implementations we can use right now at this moment. And it also made me think about, Yolande and Suzanne, about not only our renewed relationship with the people surrounding us and the people we can and we cannot connect to at this moment, but also the things and the objects. And I was thinking about, I also live in Amsterdam North, and these rabbits, they come out of the forest now, and they are taking over the streets. And I've never imagined that these kind of things would happen, because Amsterdam is a super busy city. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts also in how to connect in a way to your environment, to the things and the stuff in your house, because we've never been so much close to the place we live, right? Are you still there, Suzanne and Yolande?
Yeah, we're here. I think it's been really interesting to see the internet, flooding with these images of goats taking over in Wales, and I think it's really interesting to see animals reclaiming the space and understanding how much impact we have. And I think it's just been balancing that with celebrating it at the expense of human suffering, at the expense of human isolation. So I think that's going to be a challenge moving forward. How do we understand and take the learnings of how we impact the environment and how it's made space for animals without that promoting, as I said, that kind of ecofascism as well. So I've been enjoying watching more birds as well. Yolande?
No, I mean, I think you've wrapped it up and said it really astutely, in that one of the things that I'm taking away from our conversation is all of these things are happening, but it would be a grave mistake to take it as a win, in that it's at the cost of so many lives. And there's an asymmetry there too, right? Whose lives are most vulnerable are the ones that are being most affected at it. So it's a complicated, and it's a conflicted thing.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about this more afterwards in the Q&A. So we're going to go to the next guest. Thank you so much for your contribution, Suzanne and Yolande. So next up. Again, if you just tuned in, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments. We will come back to it later on. Our next guest is Antoine Bertin, who is the founder of sound and experience studio Sound Anything. As an artist, I think his work is best described as a mixture of, well, compelling soundscapes, interactive stories, and a tangible experience. And Antoine is one of the winners, actually, of STRP's ACT Award 2020, this year's. So let's see if he's here. Welcome, Antoine.
Hello.
Hey, hello. How has your isolation been so far?
What can I say? Good. I mean, I want to thank Yolande and Suzanne for bringing perspective on all this. I've been feeling pretty much fine, but also kind of a by definition sort of internally cocoon and looking for ways of maybe finding ways of doing something useful outside, whether it's for everyone and myself. So just looking for ways of getting into it still, I guess.
And you are in France right now?
Yes, I'm in Paris.
In Paris, okay.
Mm.
So can you give us a very brief heads up of what to expect from your contribution? Because I think you recorded something.
Yes, so I decided to do a recording presentation. It was kind of conceived as a sort of illustrated radio show. And that's because the installation I've been developing with the STRP team for STRP 2020 is very much of a sound-based work. And so I wanted to give people a feel of this. So yeah, it's going to be a kind of relaxed radio show, so people can relax and even sleep a little if they want.
And are you going to give us a little bit of an insight of what your work was going to be like, or are you going to do that afterwards?
No, absolutely. Like the presentation is about the work that's in progress, what's been done, and you'll be hearing and see things that have been developed until we had to stop for a little while. But the reflection and the process is still very much going on, and so I'm really excited about having also people's reactions to things. And
perfect. All right, take it away, Antoine.
So I mean, we can get started with the video. As I said, it's very much something to be listened to relaxedly. The work is very much about meditation through sound on our relation with other beings. So yeah, take a little time to do this, and we can talk about it after.
A counterpoint is the relationship between notes or melodies in a piece of music. For STRP, I've been working on the development of an installation called Species Counterpoint, together with Juliette Bibas and the whole STRP team. The piece weaves together two musical sequences, generated respectively from the DNA of a tree and the DNA of a human, and exhibited on a mechanical piano, a pneumatic automaton that plays the musical information that was punched on a paper roll. Plants and humans share 60% of their genetic material. The idea behind Species Counterpoint is to invite audiences to experience these similarities in the genetic code of the two species. All living beings are, in some way, a same body, a same life, a same I, which never ceases to pass from form to form, from individual to individual, from existence to existence. Emanuele Coccia. in his book Metamorphosis. Species Counterpoint is a musical meditation on the kinship between plants and humans, an auditory exploration of how this relationship could be reconfigured. The main character of the piece is a mechanical piano, also known as reproducing piano. Almost completely forgotten today, the reproducing piano was the most advanced music reproduction technology of its time. Take a look, for example, at these two adverts endorsed by Camille Saint-Saëns and Arthur Rubinstein. It's so regretful that this invention hasn't been made earlier, because we would have been able to hear Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin play themselves. Those who listen to one of my duo art recordings hear Arthur Rubinstein, nobody else, and not less than him. The piano mechanism is activated by air. It breathes in its own living being way, as the perforated piano roll unfolds. The air of the space around the artwork is inhaled and exhaled in the bellows and lungs of the instrument. In the coming example, you will be hearing a piece by Prokofiev, recorded by Prokofiev himself, making one wonder whether the piano can bring back to life the spirits coded in the paper roll. The reproduction piano is made of spruce for the soundboard, ebony for the black keys, ivory for the white keys, maple for the bridge and parts of the mechanism, beechwood, alder for the wind chests, hornbeam for the hammerheads, bone glue, fish glue, hair glue to stick all that together, shellac for the varnish, deer leather, cow leather, goat leather for the bellows, felt from wool, rubber, and rosewood for the outside. When we hear the sound of this piano, we're not only hearing the humans that played it, we hear the living beings that make it. The history of music and music technology is not only rooted but made of our relationship with plants, animals, and other humans. Listening to music is to listen to our relationship with the environment. And so two main questions have been driving this project. The first one is, how may listening help us redefine our relations with what we like to call the natural world? And the second is, what new ways of listening may emerge from a post-anthropocenic view of the world? The translation of DNA into sound is relatively simple. This process is known as sonification, or the art of transforming data into sound. Sonification is very much part of our daily lives and society. The ticking of a clock can be seen as a sonification of time. The door signals on a train signals that they are about to close. The chirp of a gravitational wave lets us hear a deformation of space-time. The beeping of the electrocardiogram reminds you that you are in a hospital with COVID-19, but that your heart is still beating. DNA is made of 4 nucleotides, also known as A, T, G, and C, the ever-evolving combination of which is behind the endless diversity of living beings on Earth. Each of these letters is to be associated with a note on the piano keyboard. A is associated with La, or A in the British system. G is associated with Sol, also known as G. C is mapped onto a Do, also known as C. T, well, as part of creating a sonification, a series of artistic choices have to be made, and T, in this composition, will be mapped to an E, also known as me. The DNA sequences of the plant and the human are unwrapped by a software and mapped onto a virtual keyboard. The DNA notes, playing one after the other, come together as a MIDI score. This digital score is then used to punch the DNA onto the musical roll and insert it into the piano. The human DNA is made of about 6 billions of nucleotides or letters. If we were to play one letter every second, the music of our genes would play for 100 years. Together with a biologist, we have therefore decided to select specific genes associated to essential functions in the life of a plant and in the life of a human in order to compare them. These 8 genes have become the 8 movements of a composition. Breathe. Feel. Eat. Fight. Poop. Reproduce. Sleep. And die. A piano plays on its own in the exhibition space. A forgotten technology, a proto-computer made of living beings, wood, paper, insects, fish, mammals, breathing the air of the exhibition space in and out. Notes, a counterpoint made of the DNA of a plant and the DNA of a human, resonate in the room and with the audience. Visitors are sitting or lying down on a soft carpet with long hair, breathing in and out the same air the piano breathes. They hear each note of the composition, experiencing the similarities in the genetic material of plants and humans. They are listening together to the metamorphosis over billions of years of the same body, the same life, the same I. I'm going to leave you now with an extract of the movement called Breathe. I would like to thank the whole STRP team for working on this together and continuing to developing that despite the complicated situation. Special thanks to Juliette Bibas, the curator on this project, and to Jérémy Le Pen, the biologist I'm collaborating with. Thank you everyone for listening to this presentation.
Welcome back, everyone. Antoine, I hope you're still with us.
I am.
Hey, good to have you back. That was beautiful. Thanks so much. You will also be there in the Q&A later on after Rocio. Okay. But just very quickly, like I said in your introduction, you won the Stripes Act Award. Congratulations on that, by the way. I was wondering if you can share any thoughts or ideas for the work you will be making for ACT?
Yeah, I think for me, the main idea on what I'm looking forward to make it happen in a physical space as well is this idea that music can be a way, and a sort of sound experience setup can be a way to reflect deeply on certain ecological systems and social subjects, not necessarily in a sort of literate way, but in a sort of abstract and physical way. And so I'm really looking for ways that the arts and such installation and music can make science and discussion more bodily and ritualistic. And so, I think I hope everyone enjoyed listening to this. And
yeah, for sure. I'm also wondering if, and of course it will, but we're not sure yet how this period of isolation and reflection and silence basically influences your work now and the creation of ideas for work.
Yeah, I mean, I think very tangibly, like this whole process of transforming DNA into sound was interrupted a bit abruptly, as you know. And so one thing, for example, I've been doing as part of this collaboration I had organized already with a biologist on the project is to get the DNA of the virus and to listen to it and to try and do something with it. And it's been quite, on a personal level, it's been quite helpful to be engaging with, what it is that sits in our bodies and it's traveling, and try to reflect on it musically and see what happens. So that's one of the ways that somehow magically the work just leaps into trying to deal with the situation on that level, and it's been great to have this, although everything was a little bit stopped.
Yeah. Thanks, Antoine, and we will see you shortly after Rocio's talk. See you later.
Thank you.
For everybody watching and also for people just tuning in on our live, this is STRP Scenario 6. Welcome, everyone. And I was just wondering where you all are from. So where are you at this moment? In which city, in which country? Please let us know in the comments below. And also, if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions for our speakers so far. So for Antoine's work, he just showed us the way he works. If you have other questions about the process he's in right now, but also Yolande and Suzanne, then already put them in the comments, because then we can collect them and use them later for the Q&A. So onwards to our last guest for tonight, last but not least, definitely not, artist Rocio Berenguer. She finds her inspiration in the dramaturgy of the body and also major challenges and changes in our contemporary world. Rocio, welcome. Are you there? Can you unmute yourself and check in with us? There you are. Wow, with a very vivid background. What are they, poodles or dogs?
Actually, they are the hybrids. Like in the last show I did, they represent the hybrids that they are boycotting, attacking the G5.
Right.
We're doing. And they are like kind of a virus or thing. Like, so after there is a person like extracting them. So I thought like, they can be invited to this. To this.
Exactly. So where are you calling from now? Because you live in France, right?
Yes, I'm in Paris.
You're in Paris as well. So you're close to Antoine?
Maybe, yeah.
you never know. Just look out your window. So also you made a video especially for tonight. I was wondering if you can lead us into it. Is there a certain introduction we need to kind of understand this work, or to get in the right mindset?
Well, first, thank you especially for the title of this meeting, which I found like really, really important, because one thing is I'm just very excited in my mind with the idea of, okay, there's like these changes we were waiting for somehow. I was waiting for. Now there are many opportunities, like radical things to that they can grow and they can really pop up. And I really hope that another world, or at least some different things will pop up in the next time. But I was also very busy with the just trying to understand what's going on and what's my place on it. Should I obey to some laws? Should I think on them? Should I not obey? Should I take care of myself? And like entering on this thing of caring, like care about yourself, all of this caring culture, which is like a bit dangerous also. And also all of this relying on all of this media and all, like giving too much power also all of this media and platforms. And so for me, it's really like, wow, how can I be coherent or try to understand more this moment? To make it short, is for me a big moment of reflection. So I was not able to do this video. So I didn't do this video. I didn't have time because I was too much on my reflection. So I asked a friend to do the video.
Right.
So I think we can see it, and after maybe if there are questions or something, we can talk on it.
Sure. Let's start the video then.
Okay.
Hey,
let's go with the video.
Hello, I'm Badwit. I think I don't want to present. I don't want to explain why I'm presenting this for Rocio because it's a long history. But I'm just here to present the G5 interspecies. So let's do it. The G5 interspecies is an artistic project from Rocio Berenguer. So we are in a near future fiction where the discovery of other intelligence, such as animal, plant, artificial, and mineral intelligence, eradicates the hierarchy between species and dethrones the human of the Anthropocene. End of the Anthropocene. The world's first G5 is getting organized. So the title G5 refers to the G8 or G20 summits. In the G5 summit, there is no human government nor financial powers. It is the meeting of the different powers of life on Earth. The mineral, the plant, the animal, the machine, and the human kingdoms are the primary life powers on Earth, and they must cooperate to secure the future of life on Earth. The summit is an open debate of the possibilities of collaboration, fusion, determination, autonomy, or independence of the different kingdoms. This project tries, through a science fiction, to offer another possible scenario of the future and opens the field of utopias that we have yet to build. But, why utopia? Why an utopia? I think she needed it. Like, at least she felt an urgent need of other narratives, other future scenarios, and other visions that opens up the perspective and actions for human. So most of the narratives about the future, especially those of the last 2 years, were apocalyptic or transhumanist. The mainstream narratives of the future were, and still are, mostly very based on a binary imaginary based on the fear of death or on human superpowers. And on the one hand, there is this apocalyptic narrative, like that desperate, dramatic, pessimistic fear of death. And on the other hand, there is this transhuman neo-colonialist narrative, like the superhero as an egocentric delirium arguing to become immortal gods, which somehow is the extreme optimistic equivalent vision of the fear of death. So what these scenarios have in common is, firstly, the narcissistic relationship to humans as the center of the world, the only important life on Earth, and completely independent and autonomous one of all the other life systems. That is like, whoa, big fiction. And secondly, the imaginary based on fear. So, human current politics seems unable to integrate a larger vision of what life on Earth means. They somehow ignore the interdependency of the different life forms, the upcoming disaster to their relationships toward them, and the vulnerability towards the environment, and the vulnerability of the environment, and towards like going forward and forwards. And there seems to be a dramatic gap between the narratives and the fictions of the representation of the human life on Earth and its real material possibilities of it and needs. So we can say that human economic system is in war with our planet. And giving the status of legal entities to non-human beings could be a way of considering and respecting other life forms on Earth, and also enhancing the possibilities to survive for the human species. So how to get away, how to build a vision of the future based on desire, how to go over the fear, how to build a narrative where humans are not at the center of the world. So there are people proposing other narratives, and they are very inspiring works of Rocio Berenguer, especially her book The Posthuman, Jane Bennett with Vibrant Matter, Donna Haraway with all her work, and Corinne Peluchon, and also Aquila Nembe with Necropolitics, and Emanuele Cocha, Bruno Latour, etc., etc. And Rocio Berenguer was especially inspired by the discussions with various specialists and scientists from a very different fields with whom she met throughout the last 2 years in this research creation process. So this process has culminated in 3 forms: a theater show called G5, a performance called Coexistence, and an installation called Litosis. Coexistence is a poem set on music and a dialogue between a human and an AI, a poetic text slam between a concert, theatrical text, and AV performance. The plot explores the coexistence between the various kingdoms in the past, the future, and the present of the G5. And the audience is invited to vote in a dedicated application before entering the show. They have to give their opinion and so how they consider their coexistence with other species, and then the performer comments on the data of the results of this referendum. Voilà, the show.
Introduction du 3e stade de négociation. L'animal exige des excuses du côté humain, est un allié de la machine, est capable de faire n'importe quoi à cette fin.
Non, c'est faux.
La machine craint le minéral car il serait le seul capable de la dominer ou la détruire.
Ce n'est pas exactement ça.
In the end of the show, the audience is again invited to vote, expressing their visions, how they see the future, how they imagine the future. And this data is again treated in real time and used to generate a vision of the future in a 3D world. Then, while organizing the G5. She were very concerned about the communication problem, of course. I mean, she was organizing a debate between the different species. Yeah, great, like amazing idea, good, go for it. And the question of how we're gonna communicate, how do we communicate, led her to create Litosis. So Voila Litosis is an interactive installation based on an imaginary interspecies intra-living communication system to communicate with various forms of terrestrial life. The system is based on the idea of using the Earth magnetic field as a medium of communication between all life forms on Earth. Yeah, it's based on the Earth magnetosphere that is also made of the lithosphere, which is these magnetized rocks on the Earth crust, and basically primary the magnetite especially. So by encoding and recording messages on the magnetite, the Litosis system allowed to send information to the Earth magnetic network. Voila. So the system is translating any signal to a universal code thanks to an AI, and a trained AI, and this universal code is based on a project of universal language created by a Spanish human monk in the 18th century called Bonifacio Soto Sochando. Voila, his face. So she take this code and rework it, and this code is translated in an electromagnetic variation, which creates a perturbation in the magnetic field of the magnetite, and thus register in the magnetic field of the Earth. So voila. Finally, the audience is invited to code a message on the stone.
Vous êtes ici ce soir pour défendre et représenter le règne humain lors de cette première débat.
And you are here tonight to represent and support human kingdom for this first session of this debate.
De cette première confrontation aux autres règnes.
For this first confrontation to the other kingdoms.
On passe aux présentations des représentants.
And now the presentation of the representatives.
Minéral voudrait changer la planète bleue en planète rouge. Et elle voudrait brûler et briller à l'extérieur comme elle brûle et brille à l'intérieur. Et elle voudrait exister enfin, c'est-à-dire extérioriser sa nature interne.
What's happening?
Behind all of this thing, G5 thing, there is a planetary organization. I mean, of course. IOFLE, Interspecies Organization for the Future of Life on Earth. And IOFLE are, of course, responsible of the organization of the G5 and many other projects, like, for example, the WOF, the We Are Food Foundation. The We Are Food Foundation comes as an initiative to regulate and balance the devouring between kingdoms, and is one of the most sensitive and tricky themes. It is about creating laws about who devours who. The central project of IOFLE is to create the first interspecies rights treaty. He says, we are one body and one only. Stop amputating us. We are continuing. We are all continuing. Fuck off with your anthropocentric political system. We are one soul body, one and only. Fuck off with your elitist system. Your five kingdoms thing doesn't exist. Fuck. It doesn't exist. We are continuity. There are like no pure species. There is no pure species existing. We are continuity. We are only one body. Fuck off with your personification system. True politics have no face. We don't need your representative bullshit anymore. You are upsetting me. They attacked the G5, and that's it. I mean, that's the show. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I spoiled the end. I'm so sorry that I spoiled the end. Well, anyway, due to the current circumstances, I don't know when they are going to be able to organize the next G5. Because now the viruses are really attacking. Like, they are showing up their power because they require a G6. They are doing a super sensational power demonstration again. And I can assure you that right now, IOFLE is working hard on negotiation with the virus's kingdom and try to find a pacific agreement of coexistence and finding out if a future G6 is possible or not. As a bandwidth, I'm looking forward for the end of the world as we know it. And our colleagues, the viruses, are working hard towards this goal. And so I have this question for you all, humans. What's next?
Wow. So welcome back. Rocio, are you still with us? Let's see. Rocio?
Yes.
Yes, great. There you are. Hey, wow. I also had some laugh out loud moments. It was very funny. Thank you so much for your contribution. And as I said before, now's the time for the other speakers to join us as well. So Suzanne, Yolande, and Antoine, please join us. Join us back. So unmute yourself and join the room. Hey, hello. Good to have you, Antoine. Good. So guys, this is also for us, I guess, very new. So let's start off with a question that I think we can all reflect on. How, and I think you all in your own way reflected on in your talks and in your contribution earlier. How is this for you as an artist, as a thinker, to work, present yourself online to a relative anonymous crowd tonight? Maybe start with Rocio, because you were the last one.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's like it was what I tried to say in the beginning is a bit, I share something that Yolande said in the beginning also, that I felt like this moment, like not to overproduce more, like not to continue as if nothing, but on the contrary, to profit, to really think on a more deeper present, like as I am not normally in, because normally I'm more like rushing to the future, taking a bit care of the past, and like this sensation of, okay, now we are a bit stuck in a present, we don't know it's gonna end, this present, because it's like, and how can I like dig on it and to deeply reflect on that and not just like rush as if nothing, because I think it's also like a lot of easy ways to just get distracted all the time and do and continue producing like crazy, and like for what, like to just continue running and I don't know, it puts me a lot of questions. In one place I'm super happy to have this like meeting, because also I'm alone for 15 days now at home, and it's like a pleasure to be like sharing that. But yeah, very short.
How about Suzanne?
Yeah, I think I've also been in isolation, I think, since March the 12th now. So also it feels a pleasure to think and to be in another mode with people. You know, my work moves between climate activism and art. So that chance to deepen that reflection, to think with others. And I think also understanding how much, the learnings and teachings from Indigenous communities, frontline communities that I work with have actually prepared us for this moment. And how a lot of the teachings around the need for spirituality, for community making and medicines, that's kind of shocked me the most, that actually we were in some ways anticipating this moment. And then at the same time, I think also, it feels good to be in community and to do some of that transdisciplinary thinking, which is something that I think the virus is really teaching us, in terms of now we're seeing scientists and thinkers having to think together. So I think beginning to open this field of space where we can think together and imagine together is definitely much needed.
Yolande or Antoine, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as Yolande, I was trying to see whether you wanted to jump in. I'll do this quick. For me, yeah, I think there's a lot of myth maybe around like art practice and isolation and the things you find inside of you. Like I've always find myself quite getting dehydrated quite quickly when I'm left on my own, although I'm not necessarily very extrovert or sociable. So I'm very pleased of this discussion, see other people's works and ideas. I think this tonight is very inspiring and somehow different in the form. It feels maybe it's always a bit step by step. I mean, last week I was trying with a friend to do a sort of online exhibition visit together, pretending to be at the cafe and pretending to try and act as if it was in real life. And I guess new things need to emerge, new forms need to emerge from this that are not necessarily just a replacement or the continuation of these things, but something a bit other. But anyway, yeah, feeling good about exchanging things.
Good.
Thank you,
Good.
everyone.
Yolande, do you have anything to add on that, or do
sure to chime in a little bit in what's been said? Like I mentioned before, I think this, once one leans into the pace that this in a way institutes, it's interesting to also think about the things that have been undone, the things that we took on board as habits that couldn't be broken, and also to think of policy making in this light. So how quickly things have turned, in fact. So registering this and then planning for what the day that's after the pandemic has been something that I've been trying to wrestle with, right? So what practices, what tools, what tactics are we registering in this moment, and how can we keep that up for the moment after the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something we should really dive into, because that concerns us all, and as well thinking about your talk together with Suzanne, it feels like there rests a huge, or at least that's how I read your dialogue, that there is a great responsibility not only with governments but also with artists and cultural institutions as well. So what do we do with everything that's happening now, and how do we take these learnings and make it into something new, something probably still unimaginable because we're in the center of it still. But before we do that, I really want to give the audience the opportunity to also engage. I have a question of Simon Bavink for Suzanne and Yolande. He says, what would be the distinction between a proactive eco-government and ecofascism for you? Just to clear that up.
Yeah. Yolande and I were talking a bit about this, and I think to begin with, we need to think about the definition of climate justice. So climate justice means that at the center of any initiatives that we take on the climate, at the heart of those are also questions of equity, of racial justice. And so I think that, when we're moving forward with policies or initiative of climate action that don't have that at the center of them, then we're verging on ecofascism. But I think with ecofascism, we need to look at the history of the environmental movement, and when that involves trying to protect pristine landscapes and seeing them as devoid of people, that's when we verge into that. For instance, we have conservation refugees, people who are forcefully evicted from their lands to protect the land. So I think it's about coming to understanding when those strategies aren't looking at social justice and also work against them. So just a short example, you can have a country that is working for carbon trading and carbon capture storage, yet at the same time is forcefully evicting indigenous communities off its land. So I think that's one way of looking at that difference. And then the context I raised it in is with social movements or climate movements that are pushing for forced population control, or the destruction, not seeing the relationship between communities and the land. So that for me would be the difference between those policies.
Yeah, very clear. Good. There's a question of Pleun Grote, not necessarily to direct it specifically at anyone. So let's see who would be able to answer it. Do you think that the isolation / COVID-19 changes the way mankind sees animals and nature, and in what way, if so? Who cares to answer this question?
Sorry, the question was change the way?
Yeah, so Pleun's question is, do you think that the isolation we're in now, or the COVID-19 crisis we're all in, changes the way mankind, so as people, see animals and nature, and if so, in what way?
I'll start and give a beginning or an answer. I don't think I have a full spectrum, but it's been, and Suzanne and Yolande were discussing a little bit about this around news of animals coming back to cities or places, and so there's been a range of this, from actual things happening in the neighborhood, like the rabbits you were mentioning earlier, to a bunch of fictions and fake news about, for example, the dolphins in the Venice canals. Or I think these ones are quite interesting. They start a bit as a like maybe a lot of fake news working on both sides, like they're like, wow, nature is coming back, not everything is dead, and at the same time some sort of shortcut into thinking that just because we remove ourselves from the world and a few days later everything's back to normal. So I guess for me, one step of answering this question of like, does it change the perspective? I'm hoping it is the beginning of changing the perspective, and see that even when we stop things and a lot of things happen, there's still a lot to be developed. And so, we can see that there are movements around the fact that our behavior changes, but I think we need to push this, and maybe it's only the beginning. Maybe in a few months, the perspective will change more.
Yeah, and maybe Suzanne or Yolande as well. it feels as though there is a kind of momentum maybe coming up, right? Because we're all experiencing this this crisis, and slowly maybe there could be a shift in the way we deal with nature, with animals. We all know that COVID-19 came from the way we maltreat animals, or the way our relation is built up with animals. So there is this momentum, but how can we shape that in a way that it's good for, well, not only humanity and the existence of humanity, but also for the non-humans?
Sure, I think part of what we've been trying to say is that actually we have tangible examples from people that have lived after an end, right? So after an end, or have experienced kind of apocalypse to varying degrees, right? Be that the transatlantic slave trade. So what can we learn from Black people when it comes to that? Be that people that are existing through disability. So what can we learn from them, right? So, which is to say there are people that that have been living through this, and it would be important at this time to not only foreground that knowledge, but give space to it and honor it too, right? So it's not an epiphany that's happening out of the blue, but there are Indigenous communities across the globe who are extremely tuned into and have been to climate change. So what does it mean actually to listen to them?
And how can art play a role in tapping into this kind of deeper knowledge, especially the Western cultural scene, which is probably not as connected to that, right? I mean, it seems as there is a gap that should be, built or bridged.
I can answer a little bit on that.
Yeah, please.
I think especially spaces like this, the way Yolande invited me into this conversation, to have those conversations between activists and artists as we start to blur the line and become polymaths ourselves. I think that's a part of it. Starting to commission more works and more research from Indigenous, Black and POC artists as well as being asked as speakers, but commissioning new works and research as well. I think that's definitely where we can learn. And when we're talking about decolonization, as Yolande said, that we foreground the knowledge systems and the work that's been happening from there. So I think a tangible resourcing of artists at the moment is really good, because they're the artists who are going to be most likely to have been impacted by coronavirus, who are surviving in other ways. So tangibly redistributing the resources of the art world and expanding the concept of art. I'd studied a lot from the tradition of Boyce and this expanded idea of art. So who we consider an artist, what we consider works in a time of coronavirus and climate change will really change who we consider part of the community.
Right. Thank you. We have another question in regards to the last question. So the question about our relationship with animals and nature, there's kind of a follow-up question on that. Does this crisis also change the way animals, things see us? So this one is maybe for Rocio. Yeah.
This is what I was thinking. Thank you very much for the person who put the question, because I was thinking, maybe it's more interesting know what the human think about again, but what are the animals thinking? And actually, one thing that is fascinating me is that to rediscover the creativity of the people, because people are like posting videos and very easy media, crazy. And there is one video that I found amazing, that are millions of different animals being completely wow, fuck, where are the humans? What are they doing? Are they preparing something, or kind of conspiration they're gonna attack after? Or many of course it's very anthropomorphic behaviors that and one of the problems also I get into by this research is how to get out of the anthropomorphic vision, because it's really hard to approach what an animal think, what animal is living, what another being can feel, or how to have empathy to them without projecting some kind of anthropomorphism, projecting your own way of understanding, feeling, and all of this. But at least this approach allow us to connect to them and to put in their place. And I think now, at least for the animals, is a very positive, for some animals, is very positive moment, because I think they are celebrating like crazy the disparition of humans. Like, at least the earth is breathing a little bit in some parts. It's not bad.
Yeah. Also going on to that, Marie-Janine says, we still talk about the virus as a revenge of nature. Isn't it a human way of seeing, so this post-anthropomorphic way, of seeing a natural event which does not have any human emotion? Shouldn't we look into another perspective to present this crisis and our relations to it, not as something we have to destroy, but something we are not compatible with? Who wants to react on Marie-Janine's thoughts and question of redefining the way we talk about this virus as well, and the situation we're in?
I would like to add one thing, and after I give the space, but is that I found the first thought I had when I know about the pandemic, it was like, beautiful, like we are waiting for a moment where the enemy is not another human, where the enemy is another thing. So some kind is like this feeling of humanity as a species, as a same thing, as a together thing. And I think this feeling is growing up, and this is very interesting. And in other hand, the fact that is something like so little, you cannot see it, it looks like non-important, and that is somehow like our fragility and our level of coexistence with millions of other beings, or that shows up, at least in unconscious. I don't know what other people, but this for me is a fascinating part of this.
Antoine, how is that for you, since you have this urge in your work to see patterns and to find things that are connected, even though they seemingly are, because we humans tend to put ourselves above a lot of things, but in a sense that's not true, right? You are looking for this universalized code, I guess. So this virus as being a part of us now, and which influences our relationship with nature and animals, and also vice versa, probably, as Rocio said. How do you look for that? Should we also change the way we have a relationship with this virus, which is basically based on fear and anger, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of facets to this virus, and Rocio was saying about how, yes, it's maybe a way to look at ourselves as a species facing something else. I've seen also a lot of utilization of the virus as a way to reify a lot of xenophobic or racist views. You know, the virus is coming from China, or some sort of speciesist view as well. The virus is coming from China, but people who eat bats, and bats are responsible. I don't know. So there's a lot of obstacles, I guess, in making something out of this virus. And it seems that I'd like to see more research around it, like that there's a lot of the pressure we have on ecosystems, the way that we are digging deeper in forest, that is exposing more, triggering more situations. But so I guess the conclusion to that is that I don't know really what to do. There's not one way of grasping this virus. I find it very slippery. I think to echo one of the questions before, I think in terms of what art can do in this situation, whether it's with the virus or the ecosystems in general, is to try, I mean, for what I'm trying to do anyway, to take science, which seems to be losing on a lot of levels. Climate science has been losing for many years. Nothing's really happening, and there's still a lot of denials of the situation. I have the feeling that art can do, through experience and feelings and other things, try to make this science more social and ritualistic, and that people can engage with it on different levels. So that's just what I wanted to add in terms of like what's art practice can do in terms of this, is to try and take these subjects and make them, put them in their like human circles, and not always in the brain, but also in the body and
the heart and the ears as well. Yeah, definitely. Going back to one of the questions, which actually a little bit goes on what Suzanne and Yolande were talking about earlier. Jan van Vlerken, he asks, during the pandemic, right, the speakers have noticed an enormous space for change, public awareness, and solidarity. It seems obvious to most of us that we want to change our perspective towards more awareness on, for example, climate change. But can you also elaborate on the how? How do you take this stage to promote climate action and post-anthropomorcentrism? Yolande, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure, I can start, and then maybe Suzanne can chime in. So, in my talk, I was mentioning policy. So one thing, for example, that I'm busy with by chance at the museum together with colleagues is thinking about an exhibitions plan for the coming 4 years. But what this moment is also forcing upon us is actually going into deeply what reflection means. So trying to match the front side and the back side of an institution. So if the front side propagates climate justice, for example, how does the backside measure up to that? So from simple things like what is the carbon footprint of a museum, right? Like how's it run? I mentioned early on who's around the table in terms of decision making. What does the team look like? So these are all like practical measures, and it's lifetime work that we're looking at, but at least steps to take steps in trying to address these things in a systemic way, right? Because climate crisis is symptomatic of something else that's awry structurally, right? So it calls for us to be doing really deep thinking in terms of how do we reorganize our structures to tend to these things.
Yeah, and I think continuing on that, if we think about the fact that this solidarity at a distance has been awakened. And if we think about, a big part of the climate crisis means that we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And most of those, 80% of the biodiversity that we need to protect and the lands where that fossil fuels are is the land of Indigenous peoples and Black and POC peoples. So that relationship with Indigenous peoples right now, understanding the complicity of corporations such as Shell and their role and their involvement in that is key. And we've been, in the past, we've done actions where, direct action, but now, that's shifting online, calling the heads of corporations, asking them to get off the territories of Indigenous communities. So seeing that trail of capital and colonization. So I think in this moment, as that empathy is awakened, we just saw the first cases of COVID-19 in the Amazon reaching there. How can we find those tools? And I think this theme that's been coming up between what Yolande and I have been saying is that many of us have been preparing for this moment. A lot of the climate justice work, the tools and the strategies there for keeping fossil fuels in the ground, for protecting the most vulnerable are at place. And even though they are interconnected and big, they are practical and they're grounded in those land struggles as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm reading a new question of Artos Ostrowiecki. He's referring to the conversation with Suzanne, and probably a blunder, which he calls it a way Yolande's tongue flipped, creating a term hypocalypse from hypocrisy and apocalypse. Maybe it wasn't a blunder. Maybe it was meant to be. I'm not sure. He says, I guess, and basing on the etymology of these words, but playing a bit with the exact execution on coining a new term from apocalypse going to this hypocalypse. His question is how art and art institutions in the current time of the hypocalypse understood as a time to play a part in answering the covered, the concealed, and the hallucination. Can propose possible practices. Let me see if we can try to kind of figure out what Artois wants to hear. I'm first of all wondering, Yolande, if that was meant for it to be the word hypocalypse, this coming together, this morph of hypocrisy and apocalypse? No? It sounds very interesting. So I guess what he's trying to say is the apocalypse, of course, meaning, full disclosure, kind of ending, but also revelation, and then hypocrisis, pretense, being hypocrite, I guess, hypocrites. He combines these two words to a new one, so being apocalyptic and hypocrite, basically. Do you also see the stage we're in right now as this kind of mix of being, because I can kind of relate to this word, right? We're in the middle of something that feels like a huge crisis, like a revelation, something we haven't encountered in many, many generations. And at the same time, it feels a bit hypocrite in a way, right? We're all taking care of each other. We all have our little circle. I think this is also something that Rocio said earlier. Like, how do we act now? What's the right way, the ethical way of us to behave in this all? Do you recognize this hypocalyptic term he is talking about?
Me?
Rocio, and maybe also Yolande?
I don't know. I think, it feels so weird to make to clean all the information what we can receive today, and to make we are not expert on many things, and actually it's very difficult to get an opinion and to build an opinion that is really valuable on many things that we are not expert, and we cannot be expert on all of that, and we cannot play as we are expert. Like, many people are like giving counsels all the time, and you should do that, and we should do this, and this is this is like this, and it's like one moment is like, whoa, everybody become an expert of whatever. I'm not an expert of this situation, and for me it's more like, how can we not try to give solutions and like produce solutions, like if we are experts already of everything, but more like how this is preparing us or trying to open the understanding. That's something that I would like to send the question to Yolande, Suzanne, or others. How do you see not this crisis, but the oncoming ones? Because I think this is just the beginning of something stronger and bigger that is coming. Anyway. And
Yolande, also going onwards on that, so how do you see the crises that are still coming? And maybe this question also for Antoine and for Rocio and Suzanne as well. Like, we see ourselves not so much as experts on everything, but we are experts on certain things. And I feel like you all feel a responsibility to act in a way, even though we are still in it. We need to build images for the future in order to move the right way, to build up a world again after this world has broken down, right? So how do we build solutions or ideas for crises that we don't even know that are about to come afterwards? maybe start with Yolande?
Sure. I mean, to deal with this question of hypocrisy, I suppose for me, the hypocrisy would lie in coming to terms with how complicit we all are in this, and then trying to think like how to deal with that complicity, right? So how to take action in a different way, how to rise to the occasion where like climate justice is concerned, and then how to institute that too. So I think going back to like the definition of climate justice also that Suzanne offered up, in that like climate justice forces us to consider that climate change is not the problem per se, but is a symptom, which points to a kind of rooted imbalance in that predominant way of life. And then in terms of like trying to think of a different life, I mean, again, there are practices that we have with us, in and amongst us, that Suzanne also pointed to in terms of indigenous knowledges. And then, of course, there's the role of art in terms of radical imagination, as like literature in terms of like science fiction. I mean, there are a myriad of examples that we could bring from artistic practice, and I think we're feeling that too in isolation as that's given space. And then there's something to halt and consider there, in that we don't want to be entrapped in reproducing and thereby recreating the very system that is fracturing at the moment.
So in a way, this time asks us for going inwards to tap into indigenous knowledge, reflection, literature, and so on. And at the same time, it breaks open this kind of energy to create new things, right? And this is what I'm looking forward to, Antoine. We've talked about this earlier, right after your talk, like how does this paradox of wanting to go inside and tapping into this feeling of reflection and going inwards, and at the same time having this sense of urgency to make new things, to make these new worlds, to build, new futures in the post-Anthropocene.
I guess there is, I don't know so much about I guess one of the underlying question of what you were saying is that the speed at which things to happen, and is there a time for a sort of a long patience meditation on the subject to bounce off this word hypocrisy. I guess there is to a certain level a lot of hypocrisy on sort of the way that we consider other beings in the light of what other cultures are expressing, or what scientific culture is finally coming to term to sort of officialize and share things such as the intelligence of plants and animals. And so I guess there is an hypocrisy on the level of trying to acknowledge this, and what does it change on the way we act on the world. But it's also a sort of cultural change that's requires a bit of time to be shifted, and maybe more than just reading about the facts, but somehow experiencing the intelligence of plants, experiences the intelligence of animals. So hopefully some of the artistic projects and sort of longer meditation can enable people to incorporate some of this information on a more physical way, and maybe that requires more time. Sorry if I went on a tangent, but
just to feed into that a little bit, I think it's mirroring something that we often feel in climate justice when people talk about this apocalypse that is coming. If you've been to any of the territories where ecocide has happened, for instance, the tar sands in Canada, it already looks like Mordor times Blade Runner. there's toxic lakes that span for kilometers. So I think this idea of time and future has to be revisited, because those system collapses are already happening, with just our bubble of privilege has popped. And I think so, as Yolande said, many of us have already survived ends. And so I think, again, it's that recentering of knowledge. And when you mention preparing for catastrophes that we don't even know, I think it's really important to know that while we're going through this pandemic, oil prices are also nosediving. So we are going through these. So I think that's where, again, the knowledge systems of people who have already been, trying to make sure that we have healthcare systems and social justice systems that protect the most vulnerable, that recentering practice is a creative practice for me, that listening and that humbling and that emptying out of the ego to be in service. As a Sikh woman, a lot of my inspiration comes from seva. So the way that we practice creativity and art is through that service. So I think in this moment, as you said, that we can't know everything and we're not experts. So I think art and the way that it holds space for us to reach the edge of consciousness. I've never tried to face fascism and climate change before. This is all, we're in this space of learning to think together, to know together, to become polymaths, to become interdisciplinary. I think that's why I find refuge in art as opposed to always doing my work in activism.
So it seems almost as though this kind of new hybrid form of artists will give birth at some time after this crisis, hopefully, where they are able to work interdisciplinary together with critics, with activists, building on, I guess, a sense of humbleness in a way. And what I find really interesting is that exactly that is the creative process, right? Not only going onwards and making new things and building, but also going inwards and really rethink what is going on and what was already going on way before COVID-19. We have to close this for tonight, but I'm really happy we had this meeting, that our guests, you all were here, and our listeners and readers on the side. Also, thank you so much for your questions, guys. Super great to have all this input as well in the conversation. Maybe we can end by giving a science fiction perspective on where we will be in exactly 1 year from now, in our most humble way as possible. Starting with Rocio, where will you be next year? Maybe in your mind or physically, or what maybe?
I think my percentage of otherness will grow. So I will be less human than I am, but maybe I'm a bit more vegetal and a bit more animal and a bit more champion. I don't know what's saying. I don't know. I think my the equilibrium gonna change, gonna evolve still. So my hybridation gonna evolve on it. So maybe this is also the way I'm gonna be more able and gonna have different kind of friends. My friends don't gonna be only humans, I think, for that period.
Good.
And I don't know, the world gonna be like a messy, interesting, growing up forces.
Antoine?
I don't know, hopefully not in my apartment.
Not?
Not. Where will I be? I think for me, it takes some time. So for example, with this project, and at one point in a presentation, I was talking about the length of these DNA sequences and the time it takes to listen to this material. So hopefully in a year, I'll have had the time to listen to a lot more of these insights on, let's say, what make things and this idea of that we are all, we as in all living beings made of the same material, and try to transform this whole. Hopefully I'll be a lot further in terms of listening to that, and I want to make this listening much more collective than before, I think, and things like, hopefully I'll be at a listening event or at the DNA rave party with a lot of trees around.
A DNA rave party. Okay,
Definitely
thanks, Antoine. Yolande. You're
sure. Yeah, I think I'm thinking quite practically about how at Van Alphen Museum we've had to, like Benin Museum and cultural institutions, have had to shift up our programming. So that means a lot of reshuffling in terms of exhibitions coming up. So I encourage everybody to come and visit and claim the space as well as yours. And then if I may diverge, one thing that we wanted to offer up, Suzanne and I, was the list of resources that we came across through our discussion and that we were sharing. And when the text is published, we'll also make those available. Thank you.
Great. Suzanne?
Yeah. I was imagining that Brexit crumbles because the UK realizes how stupid it is. So I get my privilege of EU roaming back, and a lot of my practice is around biophilia and bionosis, and I love swimming. So I will be in Croatia swimming, and there will be a mass redistribution of resources, and I'll have a hub of research that connects Indigenous artists and thinkers, and I'll be running that from Croatia. So
amazing perspective and everything in 1 year only. That's amazing.
Things are moving fast right now.
They are. Thank you guys so much.
You're on mute, Puck.
Oops, I was so intrigued by your talk. I wanted to end this program today by thanking, of course, all the viewers, thanking the guests, thanking STRP, but also attending. Taking your attention to the possibility to attend the next live STRP Scenario. If you look at Facebook, you go in the corner, you can see a little bell, and if you click on that, you will get an alert when we go live again. So please do that if you want to be here the next time we're here. Also, there is another live event tomorrow, so check that out as well. Keep updated on our Facebook and on the website. I wish you all the best. Take care. Try to find humbleness wherever you can, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.